Hello world, welcome back to Razor RC. I just want to shoot a video today talking about some setup tips for your Traxxas Maxx. This truck's been out for a few weeks now, and I've been driving and testing it pretty much since it got released, and kind of feel like the out-of-the-box setup is not particularly good. If you've seen other videos of this vehicle driving, pretty much on their first batch or out-of-the-box run, it does not drive particularly well, right? It flips over a lot. It doesn't jump and land particularly well. It tends to do weird things in the air. When it lands, it chassis slaps. So overall, I feel like while the general design architecture is fine, the setup or tune out of the box, they sort of didn't get quite right. So just want to cover some basics here. First of all, you might have noticed that this setup is pretty similar to the Traxxas X Maxx, but it's a very rear weight biased setup. So you got the motor, center differential, rear differential, battery, everything's like all the way in the back of the vehicle. Even the rear shocks are on the rear of the arms. They actually should be on the front of the arms, and I'll cover that in another video why that is. But all that weight being all the way in the back of the vehicle is part of the reason why it just does like crazy wheelies. Part of the reason why it does weird torque steer stuff when you get on the power. So just a very rear weight biased setup. Not a whole lot you can do to fix that. The only thing I can recommend is basically running your battery all the way in the front position. So out of the box, they have this spacer in the front and the battery in the back. Just flip those, run your battery in the front. That'll balance out a little bit. It'll help a little bit. It'll actually fly a little bit flatter and smoother. It won't transfer so much weight on power and off power. This car, again, has kind of this jacking effect where on power, it just squats like crazy. Off power, that weight basically gets thrown forward into the air and makes it like nosedive a lot. So just very unbalanced vehicle out of the box. That'll help a little bit with that weight distribution. Second thing you may have noticed is that the vehicle is completely symmetrical front to back. So the front shocks and rear shocks are exact same. The arms are exact same. Everything is completely symmetrical, even to the point where you can't even tell sometimes which side is the front and which is the rear. While that is good for maintenance and ease of use, it does actually provide some performance challenges. The front shocks normally should be shorter and a little more laid down than the rears. These are exactly the same. They pretty much go straight up and down the same. That's not quite right. The front arms actually should be shorter in length than the rear arms. I'm not going to explain the whole geometry reasons why, but anyways, that's nothing you can really fix. But so there are some other challenges that get posed by this. Because the front and rear shocks are exact same length, what's called the droop is actually unbalanced front to rear. So normally on a four-wheel drive vehicle, the front arms and rear arms should extend about the same distance from the chassis. So that's called droop. That's basically like how much the axles will hang down from the chassis at full extension when the shocks are fully extended. This Traxxas Maxx actually has front arms that extend down further and lower than the rear. So the front arms actually extend down more than the rears, which is really odd. It's really because of these same size shocks and arms and stuff. So that's just completely wrong. They should be about the same distance or even a little bit higher in the front, like a Traxxas Slash or pretty much any other Traxxas vehicle. So some little things you can do that fix that is basically run the front shocks on the outer hole. Out of the box, they're on the inner hull. That makes them extend a little bit longer. If you move to the outer hull, that actually lays them down a little bit more, not a whole lot, but helps. Every little bit helps. It will actually shorten the droop so it does not hang down so far, so it balances out the front and rear a little bit more. The other thing I did is on the rear shocks, I actually unscrewed this eyelet, this rod end, 1 1/4 turns. So that actually extends this overall shock shaft length by 1 millimeter, which actually, because of the geometry, of this triangle here, actually extends the rear axles down about 2 or 3 millimeters. So you get a little bit more droop in the back. Just unscrew that a little bit. You still have plenty of thread. That thing's not going to pop off, and it just gives you a little bit more shock length in the rear. Next thing I did was actually change the shock fluid on the rear shocks. So out of the box, comes with 30 weight front and back. That's way too light in the rear. I'm actually running about 42.5 to 45, I think is about right, is about balanced with the front. Front's actually not that bad out of the box. I think it's about right for just general purpose bashing. But in the rears, you're going to want to run a little bit thicker, or actually a lot thicker shock fluid. So 42.5 to 45 weight is about right. Now that's just general all-purpose bashing. If you want to do like massive jumps, I would go up even higher, you know, maybe even like 40 weight in the front, you know, 50, 55 weight in the rear, something like that. But you're going to lose some of your plushness over rocky terrain and sort of rough terrain if you do that. So I think for general purpose bashing, 30 weight up front, about 42.5 or 45 weight in the rear. And then the last thing I did was adjust the preload on these shocks. So up front, out of the box, I think it's about 5 millimeters. That's actually about right. I'm not exactly sure what it came with out of the box, but I set them to 5 millimeter in the front. And then the rears, they're just way too soft. There's not enough preload. So just turn this adjuster right here, add about 12 millimeters of spacing here between the shock, top of the shock cap and this adjuster here. So that little gap right there should be 12 millimeters. That just gets it into the stiffer part of the spring rate. So these springs are super progressive. They have few coils, which means as they get compressed, they actually get stiffer and stiffer feeling, right? The overall effect will get much stiffer the more they're actually compressed. So adding some more preload on there will get it into that stiffer part of the shock spring and actually balance out the front and back a lot more. Out of the box, it just feels way too soft in the rear. So that's the next thing I did. In terms of electronics, something you may have noticed that this truck does really weird things in the air. It flies through the air. It seems to like have a mind of its own and do weird things with the wheels and the steering and stuff. And the reason for that is actually because of the TSM on your TQI. So out of the box, it comes with your TQI, I think set to about 50% or so. Turn that off, right? This is a four-wheel drive monster truck. You don't need TSM. You've got plenty of traction. If you feel like you need TSM, well, maybe learn how to drive, right? I mean, you got four-wheel drive. I don't understand why people feel like they need TSM. Even on super loose terrain, this truck drives fine if you actually know how to drive an RC car. And if you don't know how to drive an RC car, well, maybe this is the wrong vehicle for you. Anyways, enough of a bit of a rant there, but what happens is if you have that TSM engaged, it doesn't know if it's in the air, it doesn't know if it's on the ground, so when it flies through the air and you come off just a little bit cockeyed, you know, a little bit at an angle, it'll just start rotating the car, start steering for you in the air, and start doing like really weird things. I recommend turning that off for, you know, pretty much all the time, but especially if you're doing jumps, it's just gonna be a lot more easy to control in the air because it's not trying to steer for you in the air and doing weird things. So next tip. And the final tip I have is that Traxxas Maxx out of the box pretty much has like a lock center differential. It's got 20 million weight oils, what they call it, in the center diff. I think it's actually just like shoe glue that they squeezed in there and let it dry because it's pretty much fully locked. The center diff does pretty much nothing. And so you may have noticed people when they drive this vehicle, when they hit the throttle, I mean, it just does like instant crazy wheelies. And then when they do braking, you know, it does like super endos on the front end. Now, people say, oh, this thing's got huge, awesome brakes, you know. Well, the reason for that is because the center diff is completely locked, right? When your center diff is locked and you pull the throttle, I mean, it's just going to instant wheelie because none of the power can bleed off to the other side. So same thing when you brake, you slam on the brakes, it does instant endos because none of the power can bleed to the rear. So I actually lightened the diff fluid in the center differential. Comes with 20 million weight out of the box. I just opened it up, and if you take it apart, you'll actually notice that it seems like it's just filled with putty. That's that 20 million weight goo that they got in there. So what I did was I just opened it up, took out the gears, took out about half of that putty in there, and then refilled with like a super light diff fluid. So I just refilled with 2K. You can run, you know, 5K, 10K, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But what you're basically doing is taking that 20 million weight goo, cutting it in half, and then refilling with like a 0 weight. And so what you end up with is, you know, approximately 10 million weight, you know, diff fluid. So the 10 million weight drives a lot better. It's just much smoother on power, off power. It brakes, you know, a lot more like a normal RC car should, under control and stuff. Now, it's not going to do like super, you know, standing back flips like maybe you're accustomed to. So if you like those, you know, I would just leave the center diff as is. But I think you'll find that controllability of the vehicle a lot better than before. It'll still do wheelies on demand, you know, 4S, obviously 3S, it'll still do the self-righting thing. So, you know, you still have, you know, a very, very locked differential. It just takes the edge off that a little bit and makes it a little bit easier to drive. So yeah, that's pretty much it for my tips in the setup I'm running on the Traxxas Maxx. This is not going to apply to all situations. You know, if you want to set this up for speed runs, it's going to be something completely different than something, you know, where you're launching it rich duper bash style, you know, 30 feet in the air. That's going to be a different setup, and, you know, completely different for something where you're doing like a street setup or a grass setup or whatever. You know, this is just kind of a general all-purpose bashing. I mostly run on dirt. It seems really good for that. And if you've seen some of my driving videos from the first bash, you know, the truck looked super out of control, hard to drive, would flip over a lot. And then to my last video, the Send It bash, it's just much more controlled, drives super neutrally on the ground, in the air, doesn't flip. And I actually crashed very few times in the video. I did a lot of editing in that video, but actually there's very few crashes I actually had to edit out. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, subscribe, hit the add notifications button, share with your friends. Look for more videos soon, and thanks for watching.